coaches. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, they can't hold a flame against you, ay. Blow the whistle, blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, got the game, it ain't no issue, yeah. Blowing the whistle, I had enough with you, the championship, it is gone. Ain't listen to you, I can't give it to you, cause you don't know what I've been on. This is the Coaches Podcast.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Coaches Podcast. I am your host, as always, guys, Coach Steve here. We have another fantastic episode for you guys today. I wish it was about all the crazy things that are going on today in free agency and everything that's going on right now. Partly it will be, partly we're going to be talking some dynasty and quarterbacks today. But we're going to get right into it here. Of course, Coach Tyler can't be on today's show. He's coming back from vacation, got a little behind on his day, so he'll be back next week. But we do have a fantastic guest on today's show. Nick, my friend, how are you today? Welcome on to the Fantasy Coaches.
Doing very well. Appreciate you having me on. It's awesome to come on and talk some ball. And today was a fantastic day if you are a football fan of any sort. If you're a content creator, you have way too much to talk about. I feel like, it's hard to keep up with everything and make sure that you are, talking about the impacts on fantasy and what's going on. But it felt like Christmas today, in all honesty. And you and I talked about that right before the podcast. But today is one of those days where you're like, you know what? I love doing what I do because it's fun.
Yes, absolutely. And I did not do my real job today. So this was taking over my life, which I absolutely love. So we're going to have a fun episode. Like I said, guys, I will love to talk all free agency today. And maybe we will. But we're definitely going to talk about the quarterbacks. Today's episode, I really didn't think that we would get all this free agency signings in the first 6 hours today. I figured, you know what, I'll get through a podcast and then we'll get hit with all these signings. Didn't happen that way. But we will talk about the signings of the quarterbacks over the last 2 days now. And we'll get into that first, and then we'll get into our dynasty talk with quarterbacks. So, Nick, let's start off at the top here. This was late last night. I stayed up very late to write an article about this. So Russell Wilson obviously was released today from the Denver Broncos. They're paying him basically $38 million to not be on the team. And so he decides to go and sign a friendly, very team-friendly one-year deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers here. How do you like this signing here? And what can you see in Wilson moving forward for fantasy?
Yeah, I think when you look at the landing spot and the set of weapons, it definitely is appealing. I think that, we see guys like Diontae Johnson not be what we want him to be. We see guys like George Pickens be sort of boom or bust. Pat Freiermuth, I personally had more expectations of this past season, but then you kind of tie it to who's throwing them the ball. And I think that Russell Wilson provides the Steelers with competency. And I think when you have a good system when it comes to weapons on offense, you just need a guy to be competent. Like, for instance, guys, he's polarizing, but Brock Purdy, he did a lot of great things this year, but he was a competent quarterback with good weapons. And I feel like that's what Russell Wilson could be with the Steelers, just a guy that's going to make the plays. He's not going to necessarily be the reason they win or lose all of their games. But I think the fact that you got a guy who is probably going to have some decent accuracy, a guy that has a good tenure. I mean, 4 seasons over 4,000 yards, 5 seasons over 30 touchdowns. He has some rushing ability that people don't talk about enough. And for fantasy, this past season, he was top 12 in fantasy points per game, which a lot of people don't talk about. So I think it's a bump for him personally because Diontae Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren is better than Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton, in my opinion. And then also with those guys, Russell Wilson's a lot better of a quarterback than Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph for, what it's worth. So I think everybody gets a bump here, and there's some good implications moving forward.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I'm excited, because everyone's pretty much down Wilson the last 2 years and everything that's been going down there in Denver. And, hopefully he can kind of get back to just doing what he really should be doing at this point of his career and managing games and not being the focal point of the offense and doing all the work here. Under Arthur Smith, wasn't good in Atlanta. But in Tennessee, as just the offensive coordinator, having to worry about just the offense, he helped Tannehill be a nice game manager, be very efficient, ran the ball, and had great fantasy seasons. So if Russell Wilson can do at least that, I mean, this past season before he, got benched the final 2 games, he was QB9 on the season. I mean, there's no reason why he can't have almost close to 30 touchdowns, 3,500 yards, and be a pretty solid quarterback for you this year. Whether you're looking at, a late round guy in redrafts, or if you're a contending team looking to acquire Russell Wilson, you could probably still do it for relatively cheap. It's only a 1-year deal. He definitely could be someone that could help you out as a super flex QB2 option for you while you're trying to make a championship run. But Wilson lands in a solid situation. I don't think there's much risk because I don't think you're going to be buying into him heavily or anything. So it's a good signing for him, good signing for Pittsburgh, and we'll see if it helps out for this season here. So nice to get that late on midnight. So another signing here, re-signing that happened, I believe it was yesterday, or it was maybe this morning. Baker Mayfield, 3-year deal, re-signs with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, he had a juvenile season last year for his career. Very good in fantasy, top 12 fantasy quarterback at one point during the year here. Nick, how do you feel about Baker being back, and can he continue to rebound in his career here?
Yeah, I think Baker, for fantasy purposes, will continue to be a streamable quarterback. Maybe in a super flex leagues, if you have a very strong option at QB1, maybe he's your QB2. Points per game this past season, not phenomenal, but okay. I think he had some pretty good weeks. I think he was very well connected with Mike Evans, who I think, due to both of them being back, should be a top 12 sort of argument for wide receivers this coming season. I think those two looked very good together. The fact that Baker was on a team that went to the playoffs and a team that looked pretty good in the playoffs says a lot about him, the system, his weapons. And I think that it's a good thing that the Buccaneers are bringing both of those guys back. I think that they just looked from a bird's eye view and said, hey, you know what? We actually competed this past year. Maybe they did not expect to with Baker Mayfield. Maybe they didn't expect Evans to have one of the better seasons he's had in a while. And just seeing both of those things, I think was a smart move of them to say, hey, you know what? It looked good. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Maybe we can add some pieces here and there, but they didn't really need to reinvent the wheel after a playoff run at the quarterback position. I think he deserved another shot. What he does from there, we'll see. We saw, Geno Smith have a great season, 2 years back or whatever it was, and then he got a contract, and then he wasn't so hot. So it could go one way or the other, but I do like Baker in Tampa Bay. I think he did look like he was, like you said, rejuvenated and had a bit of a career turnaround. The numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, no, it absolutely did. And it was definitely a big shocker to me because I did not expect him to kind of have that rebound season to his career here. Yeah, the offensive coordinator situation does concern me. Dave Canales leaving, going to the Carolina Panthers. You mentioned it, what happened with Geno this past year. Not the same level of efficiency that we saw in 2022 from him. There could be concerns with that. If you're looking in Dynasty right now, I think it could be a good time to sell high. You can tell you're telling people, hey, they're bringing back the bandwagon. Let's see them do it again here. And if they don't do it again, I don't really think you're going to get that high level of Baker moving forward after that. Mike Evans is getting older. He's been amazing throughout his career, but obviously, he's going to be 31 years old. That is going to catch him at some point here. They don't really have elite weapons completely around him outside of Chris Godwin, who's also getting up there in age. They have a okay run game here. We'll see if Baker can do it again here. That's going to be a big thing here if he can. But again, I'd be looking to sell off on him. But yeah, he's a streamable quarterback for this coming season because we already saw it. Let's see him do it again. So good for Baker to get paid. Nice turnaround to a guy who had a high and had a real bad low. Now it looks like he's on his way up here. One more before we get to the big one. Gardner Minshew just signed a 2-year deal worth of $25 million with the Las Vegas Raiders to compete for the starting job. Now, Minshew obviously got a chance to play last year when Anthony Richardson went down for the Colts. How do you feel about Minshew being in Las Vegas now, Nick? And does it really do anything for you, or is it really kind of what you've seen last year with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback?
It feels like a very Raiders move. They went and got Jimmy Garoppolo last season. They're going to get Gardner Minshew this season. Does this lock him in as the starter day one? I don't know. I mean, I guess money talks at the end of the day. Do they go and try to also make a move in the draft and maybe ease in a rookie? I don't know. We saw the Colts bring in Minshew, and it was a smart move because Rich got hurt at the end of the day, and Minshew came in and did a good job. How that translates to fantasy football, I don't know. I don't think anybody necessarily gets a huge boost if he indeed is the day one starter. I don't look at Devonta Adams and say, man, this is perfect for him. Now he's going to take a massive, jump back to what he was with the Packers. I don't know if I'm saying stuff like that. I respect Gardner Minshew for stepping in and doing a decent job. I think he is one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league. I don't necessarily know if he's one of the top 32 guys personally after the rookie class comes in. So maybe I'm a little pessimistic about it. I'm still skeptical that he's going to, finish the year next season as the starter the entire time, but I guess time will tell with that. But I don't know if I have Devontae Adams. I don't know if I'm like super excited about it. I have high hopes for Michael Mayer. We look back to the Colts. Did he have a good connection with any of the tight ends there? Probably not. That room was kind of banged up. Historically, has he done things with tight ends? Maybe, but I don't know. It seems super vanilla to me.
Yeah, it really does seem vanilla, honestly. I think you should be like, don't be thrilled having, Jacoby Myers, Devontae Adams, don't be like, oh yeah, I got Gardner Minshew now, but you should hope that, they'll stay consistent. There'll be startable assets. Devontae Adams will be a solid wide receiver too, potentially. Jacoby Myers can be in and out of a flex option for you for most weeks here. But Minshew himself, you saw it last year. He had similar type of talent in terms of weapons at his wide receiver position. You can say Devontae Adams is better than Pittman, whatever. But, him himself for fantasy, for Dynasty right now, I'd be looking to sell off. If someone's giving me a, second round pick in super flex leagues from Minshew right now because, he's going to start this year, absolutely take it. I mean, last year, look at him. He had 3 games all season over 20 fantasy points. He's an average guy. He's a great backup to have who can come in for relief. But he's not a 17-game starter. That's what he, unfortunately, is not. He's just not that. And it's definitely a good time. Someone who they just paid $25 million over 2 years, depending on how the contract works. Sell him off because I just don't see him. He's not going to be the long-term future for the Raiders. They might find something in the draft. They could go again next year, and he could have no guaranteed money next year, and they could go out and do a whole different thing at quarterback. So, yeah, sell off Minshew while you can right now on a good signing for him, at least getting paid. So,
agreed.
And then last but not least, the prize quarterback of free agency right now, Kirk Cousins signs with the Atlanta Falcons, 4 years, $180 million. Obviously, he's coming off that big torn Achilles injury here. But how do you feel about Kirk Cousins in Atlanta? And does this I'm assuming it does, but does this just bump everyone up there in Atlanta for you?
Absolutely. I spoke highly about Drake London. I think January and how he was such a great buy. I think it's a huge boost for him because if you look at the games that he's targeted well, he performs well. It's just 2+2 with him. Kyle Pitts, I think gets a good bump. I think even Bijan Robinson, when you got a good quarterback and now the attention could be all over the place, it's a bump for him. If you look at weeks 1 through 8 last season, he tore his Achilles in week 8. Kirk Cousins ranked 6th in total fantasy points. He was tied for 1st in passing touchdowns with 18. He was 2nd in passing yards with 2,331. So he's got juice still. He does. It was very evident last season. People forget. Like, he was very good for both fantasy and just straight up numbers. And if you look at the last 4 seasons for fantasy football, 19.3 points per game this past season, 18 the year prior, 19.2, 20. You just go backwards, and he's been very fantasy relevant. He's throwing over 4,200 passing yards from 2020 through 2022 with good passing touchdown numbers. So is Drake London Justin Jefferson? No, no. Is Kyle Pitts TJ Hawkinson? I don't know. We still have yet to see his ceiling, and we have high hopes for him. But I think all around, you got Kirk Cousins in a good home with some good young first-round talent, and you have good first-round talent with a new head coach, right? And you have first-round talent with a veteran that has produced in the fantasy capacity and just in general. So I really like this. The Achilles is a iffy injury, but Cousins isn't a mobile guy. So it's not like a piece of his game is now missing because he's on the year after the Achilles. Could it have an impact? Maybe. I'm not a medical doctor, but I do know that he was not running the ball, so it doesn't impact that part of the game.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's the one good thing is that his legs are not non-factor for his fantasy value overall. I'm sure there's going to be some early on, just little shaking off the rust kind of situation with him to some extent, I'm sure. But again, he gets to stay indoors once again. That's a great thing for him, obviously, not having to play out in the outdoors with the Falcons here. He gets Drake London, a guy who just needs a quarterback. He needs that big play quarterback on his team here. Kyle Pitts, hopefully unlocking him to that next level here. He's got a fantastic run game with something that he didn't really have the last few seasons, or at least last season there in Minnesota here. And there's a good chance now that Atlanta maybe makes a move to brings another wide receiver on, and Neighbors, Romeo Dunze, one of these guys here to bring in now, because they're going all in here, that they have a great chance here. I think this helps Kirk Cousins a lot out here, having that young core around him. Yeah, it sucks that he doesn't have Justin Jefferson anymore, but it does make up for it with some really good pieces still around him overall. And he might not be a guy who's going to throw the ball and be a, guy who's going to get you 25 plus fantasy points every single week, but in that 20-24 range. You should expect that a lot from him moving forward here with a really strong run game. And again, if they get one of those elite rookies in the draft here, that's just going to continue to give him a good value in fantasy right now. Again, in Dynasty right now, what you're looking at, you probably could get a first for him if you're a rebuilding team and your team that's not really in it and you want to get Kirk Cousins off your team. Well, it's a good time to do it now. I mean, use that, get a late first round pick out of him, because he's going to be 36 years old this season here. He's going to play till he's 40 with the Falcons, at least he will. He plays out his contract. So get a couple first, second, first, third out of it, and you should be pretty happy with Cousins. And if you can get Cousins on the cheaper than that for a contending team as a QB2, should be pretty happy with that. And you could maybe, if you're desperate enough, you even use him as your QB1, because I think there are some decent seasons still, at least the next maybe 2 years, that you should be happy with a guy like Kirk Cousins. So. All right, Nick, let's talk about one more before we get into our main topic here. Are you starting to get nervous about Justin Fields? Obviously, it's still with the Bears. We're starting to lose starting quarterback jobs here. Minnesota's open. I don't think anyone else is really that open anymore. Are you starting to get nervous about his value right now? Because he could end up being a backup this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been I'm a Bears fan, so there might be some bias, but I mean, at the end of the day, you would say if you're a fan of any NFL team, you want them to do what's best for the team, and if that ends up being Caleb Williams, I guess that is what it is. I still don't think it's impossible that they try to take a haul. I think that they might have been fielding. They continue to field offers for Justin Fields. I don't think it's impossible still that they go and trade that first round pick. I think everybody's got it locked in that they're going to draft Caleb Williams, and maybe it's more likely than not. But what they should be able to get should be a lot more than what they got last year. And the reason being is that Caleb Williams is a much different prospect than Bryce Young is. There's teams that are still open. Denver's open. The Patriots are open. People have told me earlier, like, hey, they won't trade with the Vikings. But at the end of the day, if they truly are desperate to trade Justin Fields, something is better than nothing. It is getting thinner. It is getting thinner. I saw the reports on the Raiders talking about Justin Fields, or talking with Chicago about Justin Fields. That was interesting. And I thought that might have been a thing. I'm kind of happy, low key, that it wasn't. I'm not a big fan of what they got going on with the Raiders. I think they'd have to shift a lot of things around. Seattle's interesting. No one really has talked about that. I know that they paid Geno, but when you look at the trio they have, I think everybody's down and out around Justin Fields. I've been a stan, and I'm not going to spit out a bunch of numbers right now for him, but I just think as a Bears fan and just looking bigger picture, 2 seasons ago, he was throwing the ball to Equanimeous St. Brown. Darnell Mooney was banged up. You just had these no-name wide receivers that would be wide receiver 3 or 4s on other rosters, and the O-line sucked. Like, it was a terrible O-line. And he led the league in rushing because he had to do that. Then this past season, you add DJ Moore, and now you see.
Oh, Nick, you went mute. Oh, you muted, Nick.
Am I good now?
You're good now. Yes, you're good.
My bad. My bad. Again, too excited about this. But there's these weeks this past season where he's throwing for 4 touchdowns, and he's throwing for okay yardage. And, him and DJ Moore look good. And I just think that he's never been set up great. You have all these changes to offensive coordinators and systems, and I'm not going to, he's had some bad performances, and he's got to work on a lot of things. So I'm not going to just scapegoat everything, but I still believe in the talent of Justin Fields. Personally, I do. I wouldn't mind still having him as the Bears quarterback and them taking a haul. I wouldn't. Do I think he's a starter in the league? I 100% still do. Right now, is it looking thin? Yes. So it's just this push and pull on believing in talent and still believing in a guy, but also looking at the market and saying maybe teams aren't interested, maybe things are getting thinner. So it's a very big push and pull. Not to not give a direct answer, but that's just
No,
how it
that's
feels.
okay. I saw your hypeness to get DeAndre Swift onto Chicago, so I figured
Oh
I'd ask
yeah,
you about Fields and how you thought
absolutely.
about that his situation.
I love DeAndre Swift, man. I was so hyped about that. I got signed jerseys and jerseys upstairs. Like that's been my guy. And to see that, DJ Moore is my guy too in the past. So to see 2 years in a row, they're like tapping into some fandom. I love it. But we'll see about the quarterback, I guess. But
We got a couple of weeks. We got another month and a half before we
I
know
know,
for sure
I
what's
know.
going on. So hopefully it all works out for everyone. So, but now we're going to get into our main topic of the day, guys. We're talking dynasty still, talking quarterbacks here today. Here we're going to get into basically different categories of fantasy quarterbacks here, starting with the rookie class of last year. The Strouds, the Richardsons, Bryce Young, Will Levis. Obviously, there's some other guys like O'Connell and DeVito and those guys down there if you're watching live. But we're talking about CJ Stroud. Obviously, he had a fantastic rookie season here, really helped out fantasy teams, helped out Houston in big ways here. But Nick, where do you have Stroud ranked among all of the fantasy quarterbacks right now?
Yeah, I think the more I look at the market, it almost seems like he's closer to QB3 than he is further away from it. So I think a lot of people have him around there. I have him as my quarterback 5 right now. I have him in the same tier as Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. I have him above those two guys right now, but in that same tier. So you can argue either one of those guys. But phenomenal rookie season. He's out there breaking records, single game passing yard record with 470. He goes to the playoffs, single game passing touchdown records by rookies, top 10 fantasy points per game. The season just translated very well for fantasy football. I mean, a ton of upside through the year, 5 games over 300 passing yards. He was efficient with what he was doing. He elevated the guys in that system. We're all talking about Nico Collins and Tank Dell and even Dalton Schultz, who they just extended. And I don't know if we would have if it was still, Davis Mills, right? I think the quarterback just elevated that offense. And it was clear because the Texans finished 10-7 and they had a good run in the playoffs. So I think his value should be as high as it is. As high as some people have it, maybe not. I don't know if I'm there to say he's a top 3 guy, but I do think he does deserve to be a top 5 to 7 quarterback when it comes to rankings just after that rookie season. It was phenomenal. It was one of the best rookie seasons we've seen in terms of fantasy football.
No, absolutely. I actually have him at 4 right now for myself personally.
There you go.
I loved him a lot coming out. I loved him this past season here. Again, I really wish he got the running back upgrade. That would have been nice. But if anything, that's just going to lead to him throwing the ball more this coming season here, unless they figure out something in their run game. Obviously, it seems like Dameon Pierce is their lead rusher right now. Whether or not you like Dameon Pierce, that's a different story. But there's definitely going to be talks during the draft what they want to do with their picks here. They do have a decent amount of picks, obviously, in those later rounds. They could potentially go for another wide receiver. They can do everything they want there. They could find ways to build around CJ Stroud very well. I mean, the guy's already thrown for 4,000 yards. He's dominated the AFC South. That he's going to play 6 games this coming season again. 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns and no interceptions in 5 games against them last year. And those defenses, they're not that great. They're decent. They're average at best. He's going to obviously, he's going to take that next step in his development. The rookie wall, year 2 wall is a thing. Some people think it's a thing at least here, but he showed us a lot last year that he is a fierce competitor and he's going to be a fantastic quarterback this season. And if you got him in Dynasty and you got him at the 103, 104 last year, you're sitting pretty right now because he's a guy I think that's going to be a top tier, top 3 guy, if not after this year, the year after that. So Stroud is going places sooner than later. And then second question among these rookie quarterbacks of last year, the Anthony Richardson, the Bryce Young, the Will Levis here. Of those 3, Nick, who has the brightest future for you, in your opinion? Who do you believe can actually step up this year and be a consistent quarterback for you?
I think for fantasy football, it's Anthony Richardson just because of the small window we've seen this past season. I mean, the guy, we knew he was athletic, 99 athleticism score by Next Gen Stats. had maybe the best combine ever, in terms of athleticism for a quarterback. And then, there's a lot of question marks on him throwing the ball. And we saw some decent glimpses. Week 1, 223 passing yards and a touchdown. Week 4, 200 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. I think he's a guy that can score double-digit rushing touchdowns. He was clearly on pace to do that as a rookie. So I think that, seeing the system around him as well, you just locked in Michael Pittman Jr. You locked in Jonathan Taylor back in October. So that big three, and they have the cap and the ability to continue building around him, I think makes you optimistic for Anthony Richardson. We love these dual threat quarterbacks for fantasy football, and he looks to be just that. I will say I think Bryce Young is very much a sleeper. I'm not going to say anything crazy or hot takey, but yet we have to see that there's still a good chance that they have the resources to build around him. Canales coming over. We've seen historically what he's done for quarterbacks that need a career turnaround, and that's exactly what Bryce Young needs after 1 year, because people think he is this massive bust after 1 year of football, throwing the ball to DJ Shark and 38-year-old Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo. But I think if they do build around him, which we're waiting to see if they do or not, I would say for super flex leagues, I think he's a true sleeper, but definitely in on Anthony Richardson. I think he should be ranked fairly high. Will Levis, I don't know what they're doing with the Titans right now. Obviously they just added another pass catching back to their backfield, but DeAndre Hopkins is fairly old. Treylon Burks, there's still some hope for him, but I don't know if there's much upside to Levis outside of the one game we saw out of him this past season. Other than that, Tommy DeVito, he made money off of whatever he was doing from the publicity. He's probably had his 15 minutes of fame. Aiden O'Connell, I think, is going to be a decent backup. The rest of these guys, I'm a Chicago fan, but again, people hyped him up for whatever he was doing. But yeah, that's the thoughts there.
I was excited by Baggett too when I was scouting him. I had him higher than a lot of people. Goes, who is that? Oh, he's just D2 quarterback here. You just keep your eye on him. And he ended up playing this year, so I was happy he got a chance to show the field a little bit, whether or not he's ever going to be a starter ever again in this league. But I was happy for him. Yeah, I mean, Richardson makes obviously the most sense. You saw in that 4-game sample the upside that Richardson can offer you in fantasy football right now, the rushing mobility, the rushing touchdown upside. He'll have Jonathan Taylor back. He's going to have Michael Pittman on the team here. The team could continue to look to bring in more weapons for him, a more speedster type of wide receiver that they could definitely find in this draft here to use that big arm that he does have here. And as long as he can be on the field, again, there's a big, bright future for Richardson moving forward, but I feel differently about Will Levis and Bryce Young. I actually feel like Levis might have some sleeper appeal moving forward here. I'm getting it's risky, obviously, because, he didn't show us too much last year, but Titans have a lot of money. They went with the running back for some reason and Tony Pollard here, but they do have 2 pass catching running backs that can make moves when they have open space. They can create, yards after catch kind of ability to their game there. Callahan was a guy who, over his career as a coordinator throughout his NFL career, did help a lot of quarterbacks succeed in their time there. He obviously was a big part of Joe Burrow having some great seasons the last few years here. And they might end up using that 7th pick to get a wide receiver here. They bring another wide receiver here. There's potential for him. He's got the big arm. Again, he just needs to be coached upright. And I think getting out of a old school mentality of Mike Vrabel and let's run the ball, it might help him get there. Again, it might not, obviously, but I like the chances and the weapons around him better than Bryce Young right now. Bryce Young, Carolina needs to do something because they're really not giving him the weapons to succeed. I'd love for him to succeed, but if he has another season where he had this past year with no weapons again and throwing to a 36-year-old Adam Thielen now, that's not going to be good for his progression here. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, Richardson definitely the best out of this class. Well, not this class, but out of those 3 guys moving forward. So, well, we talked about the free agency class for the most part already, but we didn't talk about them together here. So for Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield, we already talked about them for the most part, so we're not going to get too in depth with them. But if you had to have one of them right now in fantasy moving forward right now, which one would you prefer? Kirk Cousins in Atlanta or Baker Mayfield with the Bucs right now?
Kirk Cousins. I think this past season he was showing us plenty for fantasy football. Again, weeks 1 through 8, he ranked sixth in total fantasy points. So, I mean, that's not like 2 weeks of football. We talked about Richardson in a four game sample size, but Kirk Cousins was actually good for fantasy football. And Baker Mayfield was more of a streamer. You know, if you look at the points per game, he was, I think, 17th, which isn't like super, super great. So I definitely would take Cousins over Mayfield. I think he's got a better set of weapons as well. Like, credit to Mike Evans, what he did. I think he will have another good season. Chris Godwin and Baker were not very well connected, in my opinion. Kate Otten actually is probably a good sleeper just because he really rose in the actual NFL playoffs with Baker Mayfield. But, you know, if we're comparing the big three in Atlanta to what they have in Tampa, I think that's a difference. And also Cousins historically just being pretty decent for fantasy football and slept on.
Great. As you guys can see, that I had these questions preset already prior to all this going down here. I did not expect all this to go through, but yeah, Cousins makes the most sense here. Obviously, here I think he has a consistent history of great talent here. Whether or not he's much older than Baker Mayfield, the talent has just been there for him, and he's going to continue to be part of a very good offense. As you already know, I don't feel as high about Baker right now, even going back to the Bucks. So the next question here. And let's take Gardner Minshew out because obviously he'd be great to stash right now because he might be a starter this year. Out of Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett, Joe Flacco, Winston, Sam Darnold, right now, before obviously more signings happen, which of these guys are the best to stash right now that maybe could potentially start at some point this year, or just a good guy to have on your team in Dynasty?
I think it comes down to Jameis and Darnold. And I know that a lot of people, you know, hate on Sam Darnold and think he's terrible and everything. I think being the backup where he was last season adds to his resume more than it subtracts to it. I think that he was in a good system and he was getting in good reps. And I think that I still think Darnold's a better quarterback than he's given credit for. I think he's another guy that's been in nothing but bad situations throughout his career. And, you know, with the Jets, you can't talk about anything positive about them back when he was a Jet. You can say he was bad, that's fine, but he was in a very bad situation. Then he goes to Carolina, gets banged up after he was like running a lot and stuff like that. But I think he's better than a lot of people credit for, and people also probably think he's in his 30s, and he's not. Jameis Winston, I think there's a lot of upside with him just through the numbers. I mean, the last time he had a big year was the big year with that, you know, over 5,000 yard season and 33 passing touchdowns, but he was seeing a bit blurrier back then, and he also had the 30 interceptions. But I think that he's a guy that can push the ball down the field. I think he's a guy that can air it out. I think he's a guy that would have upside. Do I think he, you know, an NFL team right now is willing to take the shot on him? I don't know. Probably not either one of those guys. But I think when you look at upside, you know, if he got the reps, could he be a streamer for fantasy football? It's probably Jameis, who would realistically maybe be a starter one day over the two, maybe Darnold, but I think those two are pretty good stashes. And Joe Flacco, I think he, you know, should just ride off into the sunset after being the comeback player of the year. I don't know if he's going to come out and back up somebody else again like the way he did. I guess we'll see. Jacoby Brissett, I think we've seen historically step in and do a nice job, but I don't know if he, you know, translates great for fantasy football. Ryan Tannehill is interesting. I'd like to see where he goes. There's still spots wide open. I can see a team drafting a rookie that is not a Caleb or a Jaden Daniels or, you know, Drake May or even JJ McCarthy. Maybe it's one of the other guys, and they go and also grab Tannehill as a good veteran to have. So that'll be interesting to see. But that's kind of where I'm at with those guys.
Yeah, I like it. Like that. Yeah, I know Sam Darnold has been linked to the Vikings. I did see a report on that.
Interesting.
So that'd be interesting if he does happen to give himself a chance there. Yeah, I like Tannehill. I think he's a good veteran guy that aren't on your dynasty rosters right now. Again, I think there's still chances for him to start even this season here, or be a guy who can fill in at times here. Jacoby Brissett, he's someone I did like. You know, I wish he had gotten a chance in Washington at some point. I mean, he played 2 games, basically played 1 full game, and he did really good in that 1 full game here. And he wasn't great in Cleveland in terms of fantasy, but, you know, if you give the guy some more weapons, if he ends up in a situation like he ends up in Minnesota, he might be able to produce decent streaming options in Dynasty for you here with a good cast around him here. So he's another guy. I think he's being overlooked to a lot of Dynasty owners right now. Good time to go out and buy him. Donald and Winston obviously have more upside, I think, in their overall games. And like you said, Nick, Joe Flacco should have just retired after having that miracle season. So, but, you know, he loves football too much. So it is what it is. All right, so let's get over to the elite guys here. And again, you can think that they might not all be elite per se if you want to. This is just how I group this grouping together here personally. Here you have Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, Jackson, Burrow, Herbert, Prescott, and Brock Purdy right now. So give me your top 5 in this grouping here. Just these guys.
For dynasty purposes, out of the guys listed, I put Josh Allen as the quarterback 1, and I'd actually tier him by himself because I think he's earned that. I think he's earned the right to be the quarterback 1. I think he's been doing it, and I think he should just be the quarterback 1. I think I still have Jalen Hurts as my quarterback 2, and a lot of people are talking about eliminating the tush push, which obviously if that happened, there's no way that they would utilize a good athletic quarterback to still score rushing touchdowns, right? That would be just impossible for them to still find a way to, make him useful there. I have Patrick Mahomes at 3. I have Lamar Jackson at 4. So I have it just like you have it, but I have Hurts, Mahomes, and Jackson all in the same tier. Then after that, we talked about CJ Stroud already. I have him, Joe Burrow, and Justin Herbert in that order in that next tier. Dak, I have just looking at this list, I currently have Dak at 12, and I've kind of juggled that because I feel like he had such a good season and he probably should be higher. A little bit maybe, I guess, of age over some of the other guys I have above him. He's a guy I'm probably going to juggle between somewhere 9 and 12, but I think he deserves that. Brock Purdy, I have just outside my top 12. I have him at 13, and it feels kind of gross to say that because he was just, very good this past season, number 6 in points per game. So that's kind of where I'm at with those guys. Interesting enough, the list I have looks just like yours.
Yeah, I was actually just double checking. It's like, do I have all these guys in my top 10 right now, like in a general sense here? And yeah, everyone who's not in there right now, the only one missing is CJ Stroud, obviously, but we talked about him in a different tier. This is basically my top 10 to some extent here. Obviously, Josh Allen, obviously, is number 1 in my books here. The dual threat ability that he offers there. I do have Mahomes too, then Hurts, just strictly over Mahomes' longevity in Dynasty. I feel like that's longer than Jalen Hurts, whether or not Jalen Hurts has more upside right now. Obviously, CJ Stroud, I said I have him as 4 before. Then I have Burrow, Herbert, then Jackson. And I think I have Dak and Purdy just like that. Purdy's my number 9 guy here. I think personally I see all these guys having some elite upside to some extent here. They all either elite on their own or in elite offenses that kind of elevate their game to that elite level status. You should be pretty happy for the most part in Dynasty, redraft, whatever, having any one of these quarterbacks for the most part because they all can provide you over 20 fantasy points a game in almost any given week here for fantasy right now. So great elite grouping here. I don't think there's too much concern with these guys compared to other fantasy quarterbacks. I think there's very few things you really want to knock them on, that there are definitely bigger knocks than some of the guys we'll talk about later. But again, Purdy is a guy, obviously, that is still controversial, maybe to some people here in general sense, because, 7th round pick, one obviously had a great season this year, but, they went through a stretch of games where they were really bad, and it was because of Purdy. So, how do you feel about overall Purdy in Dynasty?
I think he's earned his job clearly. I think that the system is very supportive as of right now. You have a lot of guys that provide a lot after the catch. Christian McCaffrey, a ton after the catch. Ayuk and Debo, even Kittle, they do a ton after the catch, so that adds statistics to him, right? It increases his ceiling for yardage. You have to make the throws at the end of the day. I know people have talked historically about guys being like system quarterbacks and things like that, but you got to make the throws. You have to make the throws, and he was number 1 in yards per attempt this past season. Player Profiler ranked him number 1 in deep ball completion percentage, number 4 in pressure completion percentage, number 1 in play action completion percentage. He was number 2 in red zone completion percentage. He was number 1 in QBR. Like, when you have a great set of weapons and you are very efficient with what you do, it translates well to real life, team getting dubs and the offense producing numbers, and for fantasy football as well. I think that we saw it this past season that he was not a streaming quarterback like maybe some of us thought he was going to be. He was a very much so quarterback 1 on fantasy teams. And when he's geared up to continue doing what he did this past season in 2024, it's hard to really, weigh out anything against him. So when I say that, I have him as quarterback 13, I think, following NFL free agency and in the NFL draft, it's something I truly got to think about, because if I look at reasons why I shouldn't have him higher, it's hard right now. It is hard. So like you said, he might have struggled in some of those games, but I mean, you're talking about a guy that nobody expected to be doing what he's doing, and he had a lot more good games than bad. So respect to Purdy this past season.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it. Honestly, going into last year, I was like, no, yeah, it was a fluke. Yeah, he had a couple good games here and there. He had a good streak going on, but I didn't really believe in the talent here. And seeing the season, yes, he had his struggles at times. People forget he's still a young quarterback. He's going to have struggles. If people were talking about CJ Stroud this year having a few 4-game streak where he kind of struggled, people aren't going to bring the pitchforks out and say, he's not great. And I think they did that with Purdy at some point, and he was able to rebound mid-season and bring that mentality back to perform at a good fantasy level for us overall. Again, you saw even Christian McCaffrey have all these rushing touchdowns last year. That could have easily went to Brock Purdy's way. There's a potential for him to have 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns in the season based on this offense that's surrounding him. And that's going to continue. They're going to continue to bring in talent on this offense here, whether it's, a new backup running back, whether it's another wide receiver later in the draft. They're going to bring talent in this offense here, one way or the other, to keep Brock Purdy, have that elite core around him here. And in fantasy right now, I think you could still get him on the cheaper end based on where his fantasy value this past season was. And you should be happy about it because I think he's going to be tied here. I don't see Kyle Shanahan leaving anytime soon in San Francisco. I think they love him there. They love the competitive Super Bowl atmosphere that they bring almost every season here. I just don't see how you go away. I don't see how another head coach can do better than what Kyle Shanahan is doing for this 49ers team for the last decade here, whether or not he has won a Super Bowl. But Brock Purdy is tied to a fantastic coach, a great offensive mind. So he's going to be great for Dynasty for hopefully a long time. Another guy I want to talk about is Joe Burrow here. Obviously, this past season wasn't good for him. Obviously, he dealt with a lot of injuries overall. But is this a time for you to go and kind of buy a dip on Joe Burrow right now? Are you not concerned with the injuries he's had? Again, I know there've been different injuries, so that's not something that in terms of injury prone at all. But obviously he's missed multiple seasons, half the seasons now at this point. Are there concerns with you with Burrow, or you want to buy that dip right now that he might offer you in Dynasty?
I think you also, if you are going to buy a dip, I still believe in Joe Burrow. I think he's one of the best talents in the league. I still believe that. You look at the passing numbers, 4,600-ish, 4,500-ish yards, 2021 and 2022. I think he's a candidate to toss 40 touchdowns in a season. Number 4 in points per game in 2022. And I think he is a guy that you can probably buy lower than you should be able to, but I would wait because I think that there is a realistic chance that per request that T. Higgins gets traded. And if that happens, now you're looking at a guy who missed time. He only played 10 games in 2023. Is he injury prone? Is he not? I don't think he is, but other people might be thinking like that. Now they're missing T. Higgins. I don't know if Joe Mixon's going to be back. They might release him or something like that. Maybe Joe Burrow needs to be knocked down rankings. So at that point, then I'm sending offers because I still believe in the talent. I still love the connection to Jamar Chase. They still have the opportunity to build their offense, and I think they will. I don't think they're settled at all on what they have right now. And I think if they lose T. Higgins, people are going to think now he lost his second best weapon after he's been injured, and I don't really know how I feel about him. And that's when you come in, and I think that's just playing Dynasty the right way. Do you believe in the talent? If you do, now's the time because the longer you wait, the better chance that positive things change. I talked about in a video recently, back in January, like I said before, buy Drake London. I love the talent. I believe in the talent. Now, can you buy Drake London for what you could have back in January? Probably not, because things changed in a positive way. So when things are going the opposite way, that's when you can capitalize on talent in Dynasty.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it there. Joe Burrow has a tremendous amount of talent here, and if you do believe in it, you definitely should be doing what Nick just said here. Even last season, even with all the struggles he had last year with him, after he got off the injury report in week 5, from week 5 to week 10, he was QB6. He found a way to kind of bounce back. He had a tough stretch of games against competitive teams, and he performed at a high level. He's got Jamar Chase at least. That's the big thing. Even with whether or not he loses T. Higgins, he's still Joe Burrow, and he's going to continue to do things that make you say, wow. on the field here. And in fantasy football right now, people could be scared about the injuries. People could be scared about losing T. Higgins. That's when you buy, because if Joe Burrow is on the field, and when he's on the field, and he should be on the field, he's a top 5 fantasy quarterback at any given moment here. And he's got his number one weapon on the field here. There are fine ways to bring in new talent on this offense here. That's not going to be an issue there. This is the draft they could probably do that in, because there's a lot of talented wide receivers that they can bring in right now here. And if there's any concerns with Joe Burrow, you got to go buy that dip if there is one in one of your leagues right now. All right, on to our next slide here. We are moving on to slide 5, the aging quarterback vets. Guys who are basically all over the age of 33 now, I believe they are, if I'm not mistaken here at this point here. Rodgers, Stafford, Smith, Carr, Wilson here. Of these vets, is there still one you really want to roster? And it might be someone we've already talked about, but Nick, which one of these guys do you still want to roster in Dynasty, if obviously you're contending?
We talked about earlier, but I'd still say Russell Wilson. I think just because this past season he was a top 12 quarterback in points per game, and a lot of us should look at his season and say he had a bad one, but for fantasy football it was decent, and now he gets a pretty good set of weapons. Offensive line is probably still a question in Pittsburgh, but I think he's a good guy to roster. Derek Carr is more of a streamer. I don't know how I feel about Geno Smith after this past season. Aaron Rodgers is interesting just because of the history of what he's done. And you look at Breece Hall and what he does as a pass-catching running back. He's a complete running back, but I'm just saying what he can do to a quarterback's numbers. Also, Garrett Wilson, I think we all believe in the talent just because he's done the most he could with the least probably possible at times, it feels like. So I think Aaron Rodgers can almost have I tweeted this before, like a Joe Flacco sort of a season where you got this like old guy stepping in and all he's doing is he has pass protection and he's just making these big plays. I think that probably could be Aaron Rodgers. I think Matthew Stafford's interesting too a little bit just because with a healthy trio of Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua, I think that there's some fantasy potential there and some passing yard and passing touchdown upside. It might be one of those, hey, I'm going for it all, and I need a third quarterback who I can plug and play at times, and maybe that's Stafford. I think this past season we saw some decent fantasy relevance out of him. And is that going to be a guy you're going to roster for 3 years? Probably not. Same with Rodgers. 3 years, probably not. But I think win now, cap on, and what I can trade in terms of value right now, I think those are guys to take a shot on.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, Wilson obviously makes a lot of sense here. His age is still relatively younger. He's starting to be 36 this year. He's just signing with a new offense here. Matthew Stafford for me is someone I still really like. Really down year from him this year, kind of career lows in a lot of categories for him, unfortunately. Despite that, how well the offense, at least the wide receivers or the skilled players, did this year. I think he's still someone that I think I would go out and buy on the low right now if you're a contending team looking for that QB2, QB3 kind of potential this season here, because Nick said, you're right. If this is a healthy unit next year and they've rebounded on their offensive line real quickly, he could be really good this year. People forget that only 2 years ago, he was coming off a pretty serious neck injury, back injury that kind of shook him up a couple seasons ago. So again, that takes time to kind of fully recover from that, especially a back injury. We all know back injuries could last forever the older you get. So this could be someone that you could end up having a really good year. I'm still a little torn on Rodgers. That offensive line for the Jets still does really scare me moving forward. I know he's got Garrett Wilson, but outside of Garrett Wilson, there's really no one else. Alan Lazard, his buddies there. Maybe they bring back Randall Cobb and stuff, but it's a different atmosphere there for Rodgers. I didn't realize he was going to be 40 years old this year. I don't know why that just scared me to hell for a fact. They want to have him. I'm like, not every quarterback who's great can play into their 40s here. We know a couple guys did it, but it's 40 years is still 40 years old. But yeah, Stafford, Wilson, definitely good guys. Carr, I don't think Smith lasts the full year if he ends up struggling again. I think Coach already said that he's not a guaranteed starter yet. I'd love to see Carr do something, but he's never been a guy that's going to throw for 30 plus touchdowns. He's going to be a 25 guy, those for maybe 4,000 yards. You kind of get what you get from him. But again, he's a guy who could be gone after this season too if he continues to struggle in New Orleans. So, all right, on to the next slide here. Likely backups. A lot of backups here. Some guys who, you could still maybe have talent somewhere. Some guys in Dynasty, you're rebuilding and you want to hold on to some guys like Trey Lance, Mac Jones, who just got traded to the Jags this past week. Zach Wilson, Hendon Hooker, Joshua Dobbs, Sam Howell, Bailey Zappi, Desmond Ritter, Jimmy G, Jarrett Stidham. Maybe he's a starter now. We don't know yet. We'll see. Any of these guys worth kind of going out and grabbing if you're rebuilding and hoping that maybe they can get a chance again or be at least a really decent backup for you when you're ready to compete?
I think when you look at backup quarterbacks, it's interesting to see like who ends up translating well for fantasy football. We saw so many backups this past season have okay glimpses of fantasy football relevance. Jake Browning and Joe Flacco and Josh Dobbs and even like Nick Mullins. Those are guys that had decent fantasy weeks. I think when you weigh out backups, you have to think about, again, I said this earlier, if he got the job, if it came down to an injury or something along those lines, if he got the job, will he score good fantasy points, or could he score good fantasy points? Like a guy like Mac Jones, the Jaguars might be a better system than what he's had with the Patriots. Is he a upside fantasy play by any means? Probably not. I think you go and look at Desmond Ritter too. I guess he had some okay weeks when he like randomly ran into the end zone and stuff like that. Does he have fantasy football upside? No, I don't think so. But Sam Howell had some good weeks for fantasy football this past season. He was actually very fantasy relevant for a chunk of games. And I think he had some really bad games, but he translated for fantasy football. Josh Dobbs, did he translate to fantasy football? At times, yes, he did. Trey Lance, could he because of the rushing ability? Maybe. I'm never been a Trey Lance fan or anything like that. If he ends up falling into a job somehow, there was rumors like with the Vikings, maybe then, but I think that's what it comes down to. Jimmy G, is he going to go out and score you 20 something fantasy points? Probably not. That's kind of how I weigh out the quarterbacks in super flex leagues when it comes to backups. Like who could do something for me, because we see so often that, we pick up these guys that end up being a 1 week or 2 week starter in super flex leagues. And then we juggle, do I play him or do I play this wide receiver? Because, they can probably give us similar things, but I actually might go with the wide receiver because he seems safer. So that's kind of the mindset there.
No, I like that. I think that's a better way to. Oh, there we go. Commanders sign Austin Eckler.
Wow, that's
interesting.
There you go. That's interesting.
Those are all my Brian Robinson shares. But when it comes to backup quarterbacks, that Nick's right. Yeah, you have to think of what you're looking for and what they could do as a starter. What upside do they offer you in fantasy football? There's a lot more backup quarterbacks I probably could have named, probably should have named. But you want to find players who have that upside that could come in and be someone who ends up being very successful for you if they had to become in the starter. I also look at situations too. I look at, if, what quarterback situations kind of up and down where I could see them taking over at some point because the starter's not good. We saw that plenty of places last year, the Raiders last year, the Cardinals situation before Kyler Murray came back. There's a couple other situations that, you just look at like, all right, I want the backups there, whether or not, they're going to give you always the elite upside, but giving you a body that you can use in your advantage to whether it's trading them or starting them in bye weeks when you need to start them because your quarterbacks, like last year, either got hurt or on bye weeks, but you got to put somebody in your quarterback one spot at least. That's kind of how also I, go after the backup quarterback play. I always have way too many backup quarterbacks for my own good. So, but
smart.
Helped me last year at least. So maybe not the year before, but last year. All right, and the last but not least slide of the night here, the starters with question marks. Basically, I don't know if Kenny Pickett's a starter anymore, but this grouping here of guys who, all starters right now, but they all might still have questions that you're concerned with overall. Jared Goff, Tua, Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, Deshaun Watson here. And the first question I want to start with is Kyler Murray, because I think this was a hot topic for a lot of people this offseason. Is this an opportunity for you to buy low on Kyler Murray? He came back after being injured last year, looked pretty decent at times for fantasy football. Is this a guy you're looking to buy low on right now?
I would be, just because historically he's been very good at fantasy football. I think what impacts him is only playing in 11 games in 2022 due to the big injury, and then only playing in 8 games this past season. And in this past season, within those 8 games, he was a top 12 quarterback in half of them. So, I mean, he did what he has done historically. And then you look at points per game prior to 2023, 2020 through 2022, going back 2022 back, 18.9 points per game, number 7, 22 points per game, number 4, 24.4 points per game, number 3. So obviously he's been a top 7 guy for when he is healthier, when he's actually playing enough games, I guess, to make the threshold. The interesting thing with Murray, though, is, we all love Trey McBride. I've been a big Trey McBride fan for a while, since he was a prospect. But we rank him so high for Dynasty. He's attached to Kyler Murray. And a lot of mock drafts have the Arizona Cardinals selecting Marvin Harrison Jr. So does that mean it's a lock? No, of course not. But is it a true possibility that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride are his 1-2 options now? I think so. So you got a guy that was very fantasy relevant when healthy. Now you're going to give him an elite wide receiver prospect. And you also have a tight end that looks pretty damn near elite as well. So I think it's a great time to buy Kyler Murray. And I've never really been a huge Kyler Murray fan. Maybe it's just me kind of sleeping on him myself. But when you look at, injuries and lack of hype, he's being valued right now by KeepTradeCut.com as a quarterback 11. I'm buying. Could he be weekly better than the quarterback 11? Probably, especially if that trio actually, comes to fruition.
Yeah, he has a lot of upside in his game. Obviously, the mobility is there, the big playability that he offers on the field when he's there. But obviously, yeah, people are concerned about a lot of his second halves of his NFL career has kind of fallen off almost every single season as a starter. You get to, and a lot of people want to use the term of Call of Duty as his downfall in life. But, in general sense, you just see a different half of him as the season goes on, whether or not it's like a fatigue thing or not. But obviously that's a concern to a lot of people out there in fantasy football. Obviously getting, DeAndre Hopkins at one point obviously was fantastic for his game and helped having that elite wide receiver there. And they could very well get Marvin Harrison Jr. on this Cardinals team here. And I think that will help him out a lot there. You saw last year, Hollywood Brown, just, he's an average guy, and he was in and out of the lineup. You have a lot of young players. You have, Rondale Moore, Greg Dolch. Like, these aren't guys that's going to help elevate your game in football. And it's not going to help us in fantasy football either. So Murray, this is a good time to buy low on him because, he's someone who has top 7, top 8 upside if he's on the field and he's got players around him to throw the ball to any given week. So yeah, go out and buy Kyler Murray while you can right now because, I think if anything, his value is just going to kind of creepily go up as the offseason goes on, and to the point where you're like, the negatives don't outweigh the positives at that point. But right now it kind of does because you can kind of get him on the cheap right now. So next question here. I'm going to change this one up here because what Fields is going through. We already talked about a lot about Fields here. I'm going to go with Tua and Goff here. Jared Goff obviously is part of a really good Lions offense. I'm sorry to change it up on here, Nick.
You're good.
I changed this one up earlier. I think I had which backup don't you want, Pickett or Jones? But obviously Jared Goff is attached to a really good offense in a general sense. He's got a lot of great weapons there. But he's just a guy. He's a decent, above average guy, and he has also a really strong run game. But then you have Tua Tagovailoa, and the upside that Tua offers is fantastic. But obviously his downside sometimes can be a little hard to swallow a little bit there. Between those two, who do you value more moving forward for you? Who do you prefer in fantasy football right now?
Yeah, so I have them in the same tier. I have them, outside the top 12, but they're in the tier of 13 through 17, which seems like a big tier, but it's just guys that I keep juggling around. Right now, I've always been a Tua fan. I've been a Tua fan for a while. I think that he, again, I talk about quarterback competency, getting the ball into their playmaker hands, especially, I mentioned Brock Purdy getting the ball into guys that provide tons of yards after the catch. That's what Miami does, though, right? Everything is after the catch, or you got a bunch of playmakers with electric speed, so that adds a lot of value to Tua because at the end of the day, he is an accurate quarterback, and all he has to do is get the ball into those guys' hands. And his deep ball is a lot better than people give him credit for. Tyreek Hill is aging. I kind of prefer Goff, which sounds it sounds kind of it sounds a little iffy, but the past 2 seasons we've seen him produce good numbers through the air. Over 4,400 passing yards back-to-back years, 30 and 29 passing touchdowns. Those are good numbers. Top 12 this past season in fantasy points per game. Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we like Sam Laporta, and we like Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, that is such a great trio to have in terms of he's the anchor of my wide receiver room. Here's the anchor of my running back room, even though it's a committee and people don't want to acknowledge that enough. But that's fine. And then Sam Laporta being the dynasty tight end 1. I think that it's a great system. A lot of people have thrown him under the bus too often, but then come like playoff time, we're looking at Jared Goff like, hey, he is the guy. And I just look at a guy in a good system with good young pieces. And we talked earlier about, hey, now Kirk Cousins has these young weapons that he can utilize. So does Jared Goff. At the end of the day. So I've always been higher on Goff than most people. But I think he deserves to be a guy that's talked about more often as a high-end quarterback too. I would love to have like a stud elite quarterback in a super flex league. And then my other quarterback weekly is Jared Goff. I wouldn't mind that at all. And then I kind of build around that for dynasty. But talent wise, maybe it's Tua. Situation wise, though, for me, it's Jared Goff and that Lions offense.
Yeah, no, I like that. And honestly, kind of how I feel. I still have Tua ranked higher. I think there's things in this Dolphins offense, that still haven't been fully unlocked. I feel like they're not playing fully unlocked overall. What Mike McDaniels is trying to do for this overall offense here. Obviously, they have a fantastic trio there with Hill, Waddle, and Tua himself there. But I think you saw at times last year that they need to bring in somebody else to kind of help take the underneath away. Not away, but take the underneath plays for Tua to kind of help him out there. They didn't have anything at tight end. They bring in Jonnu Smith, which I think is a fun option there. But if you look at the wide receivers, once Waddle or Hill were out of the lineup, like it looked so much different. This offense couldn't run the same way. Cedric Wilson, Braxton Berrios, Chosen Anderson. The offense could not sustain itself there without those guys on the field here. And obviously, it kind of helped. It struggled a little bit there in that sense there. And I think Tua needs that extra man that they can rely on as a safety blanket underneath when he's not throwing deep or throwing it downfield to Hill or Waddle on the field there. And I think that upside overall in that offense would help boost his overall stats. And in a general sense, I think Tua has more upside, big play ability, which is fantastic to have. But the downside when he's playing these tough defenses and then obviously games where it's kind of late in the season in the cold weather, it definitely can scare you a little bit. But Tua can help or make or break your fantasy day pretty much any given week, which is why you kind of like him, because when he does do it for you, it's awesome. But when he doesn't do it for you, you're really hating yourself. With Goff, he's kind of in the middle there. He's not going to really hurt you, but he's not going to always give you the upside that you want, even with the weapons around him, because there's so many good weapons and the run game is so strong there in Detroit that they don't need him to throw the ball, for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns any given week here. They have a good running duo. If he throws for 220 and a touchdown and they win the game, they don't care. That's how they play that football game there. Now, can he do it? Absolutely here. He might be the safer option for you overall. But I think I still have Tua higher because I think there's more. I just love the upside that Tua offers. And then last but not least, Trevor Lawrence. Should Trevor Lawrence be in that elite tiering that we talked about before, Nick? You might have him there. I don't know. But should he be there for you, or should he be in this situation? How do you feel about Trevor Lawrence?
Well, they did just add an elite option in Gabe Davis today. So, I mean, there's that. In which I'm joking about, but no, I don't see Trevor Lawrence as an elite quarterback for fantasy football. I personally don't. The past 2 seasons, number 13 in points per game, number 12 in points per game. He's throwing over 4,000 passing yards, which is pretty good. The passing touchdown numbers is pretty weak, and I don't think that's talked about enough. And if you want to say he doesn't have elite weapons or something along those lines, 12, 25, and 21 passing touchdowns is not something you talk too highly about for a guy that you probably expect a lot more out of. He does have some mobility, which is decent, over 300 rushing yards in 2 out of 3 seasons and can score on the ground a little bit. But there's nothing he's done personally for me to be like, you know what, he needs to be a top 10 quarterback in Dynasty. Maybe some people have him there because of talent, but I think you have to normalize sometimes players being better NFL players than fantasy football players. Just because Anthony Richardson, for example, is a great asset to have in fantasy football, maybe he's not as talented, through the air as a Trevor Lawrence or something like that. But when we're specifically talking about fantasy football, I just don't see the upside in Trevor Lawrence that some other people do that have him ranked fairly high. And I could be wrong. He can come out this year. Maybe they add someone else and he completely balls out and he's a weekly starter. But, right now, am I comfortable in a one quarterback league having Trevor Lawrence as my quarterback one? No. And if the answer is no to that, then I don't see him as an elite fantasy football quarterback. But I've been wrong 1,000 times before, so I guess time will tell.
Yeah, no, I like that answer there a lot there because, I wasn't as high with Lawrence coming at it when he was drafted here. I thought that his offense kind of made him better at times than what he showed us on the field, especially when I was watching film on him. And again, you're right. He hasn't really done anything to wow us in fantasy. Yeah, he had that stretch of games 2 years ago where it was like, oh, he looked really good, helped him get in the playoffs. But, for the rest of it, it's been mediocre. The interceptions of 39 in 3 seasons, that's a concern. We talk about guys like Daniel Jones in a different situation, but we talk about players who are bad and the turnovers that they could create, but we don't talk about Trevor Lawrence and the turnovers that he's been creating for this team here. Whether or not it's his fault always, the turnovers are still there. And that's a concern for me for fantasy football right now, that they need to do that. I think the Jags are doing a disservice to not going out and getting him that elite talent because I think he can be a good quarterback. I think he needs that Josh Allen-like situation where they bring in a Stephon Diggs for him, but for Trevor Lawrence and whatever situation that is, and gets that elite wide receiver in there to give him that upside. Christian Kirk, great number 2 wide receiver. I think he's been great there. He's been solid. Gabe Davis doesn't push the needle for me, whether or not I've always liked Gabe Davis or not. He's not a needle pusher in this situation here, unfortunately. And yeah, they brought in Calvin Ridley last year. That was great. Well, Calvin Ridley didn't play football for a year and a half. That's not really a guy who was 30 years old coming to help out. That's not the elite option that's going to get you over the top consistently. They need to bring in an elite guy. And if they don't bring him an elite guy to pair up with, I don't think he ever gets to that part. I think he's always going to be in that middle tier area where, yeah, he's solid, but, there's definitely question marks about his game that I'm not always comfortable starting or having on my dynasty roster at any given time. But until then, yeah, he fits this category because there's question marks about his game there. Turnovers are a big issue. The upside that he offers isn't always consistently there. And again, he's a guy who hasn't thrown 30 touchdowns in his career, the first overall pick. There's got to be something in there that we're missing. So, yeah, for me, Lawrence is in this situation here, though. But that is going to wrap us up for the night here, Nick. I hope you enjoyed joining on the show today. A lot of fun chatting with you about fantasy football. I'll give you the floor if there's some things you got going on. I know you're always got stuff going on, so I'll give you the floor, my friend, to chat.
For sure, and I appreciate you having me on. You run a great show. This was a ton of fun to come on and just talk some ball. Don't do it as often as I used to in terms of guesting on podcasts. So really glad we got to link up again and talk. And this was a great show. So I appreciate you having me on. Nick Skrip, I'm the NFL content lead, and I handle the social medias for Fantrax, the brand Fantrax, which is behind me. So if you ever go to their social media pages and see any graphics, it's myself doing that. But myself as a content creator, I just create tons of stuff on a daily basis, whether it's like a big write-up, an article, short video, live stream, graphics, data drops. I try to have a mixture of just about everything. Just to be a diverse content creator. So pretty active on Twitter, just plugging stuff daily. So yeah, it's something I love to do. It's a big time escape for me at the end of the day. Life gets busy and life gets hectic. And I think just, talking ball and creating content is just something I love to do. So check out my work at any time. And again, really appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely, Nick, and I appreciate you joining on. And again, I appreciate you guys all for tuning in tonight. We got a lot of viewers out there. Love that tonight. Great to see that out there. Obviously, we'll be back next Monday talking more of the free agency stuff. We will get into free agency. We'll talk about all the signings, especially all the running backs that went down today. We'll get into that next week here. And again, continue to tune in, guys, every Monday on our YouTube channel at the Fantasy Coaches between 6 and 7 p.m. We'd love to have you on. We'll have Coach Tyler back on the show next week. We'll have a new guest on next week. And we'll continue to run through the offseason, trying to help you guys win some championships. And until then, guys, thank you all for listening. Tune in until next time, guys, and have a good one.
Back to back is not far-fetched. We got a couple of